take a look at another web issue. So we have another, shall we say, open web interface on our XP system, phpMyAdmin. What this gives us access to is SQL commands. So a little bit different here. We are going to have to figure out how to do this with SQL, which if you paid as much attention in databases class as I did in school, might be something you have to look up. So what we want to do, and this is in the slides, and this certainly isn't the only way to do this, this is just my preference for a start, maybe because I'm so poor at SQL, that's why I do it this way. So I want to do select, and I'm going to select some text, so I want quotations around it. I'm basically going to make the smallest PHP shell you can possibly make. So PHP syntax, less than, question mark, PHP. Then I'm just going to run the system command, one of those commands that is a very bad thing to do for secure development. It's a good way to have flaws in your code, as I well know. But what we want to do is use it here. So basically we're going to run a system command, so we're just going to tell it run the command parameter. So this is probably pretty similar to that simple backdoor. We can certainly take a look at it, but we're just going to have the CMD or command parameter in our URL, like we did with that simple PHP backdoor, and it's just going to be passed into system and it's going to output the results to us. So a really small, easy to type little backdoor here, and something about this looks wrong. I think this should be brackets, and again, this is in the or square braces or whatever you call them. This is in the slides, so I mean this is something that I look up when I have to do it, or just have it in my notes. That looks right. Alright, so semicolon at the end. PHP is one of those languages that uses our semicolons. If you went through the scripting and programming section, you know, some do, some don't. So close our quotation marks, and what we want to do is select this text into out file. So that's the syntax in SQL basically for writing a file to the disk. And our database actually runs as a system user, so we should be able to write pretty much anywhere we like, since we do have the privileges. But our goal, like with our previous example, is going to be able to execute the script through the web server. So do need double backslashes to escape, otherwise we'll end up with a file that's right on the C drive that's got a long name and no slashes in it, and our goal again is going to be to execute it from the web server. So the default location for this is cxampped htdocs. So on Windows, this is the default install location. And I'll just call it shell.php. And this is not in the webdav directory. This is just going to be straight in the web server's main directory, htdocs. And actually we need quotations around that too. That should be good to go. We can click this go button here. And we didn't get an error, so if it doesn't throw an error, that means it worked. So we can run other SQL queries, certainly. I didn't have you add any particular databases here, so it's just the default, but if they did have additional databases, that would be definitely something we'd want to look at. They may have MS SQL as opposed to MySQL or even Oracle. Oracle, in my opinion, is not that fun to work with, but MS SQL can be nice because it, like this, may allow you to have some command execution. By default, they have the processes or the procedures that will allow you to have command execution off, so you either have to be able to turn it on or do something like this, or you make a file But in this case, we weren't able to authenticate with MySQL directly. It was unauthorized. We had to go in through this phpMyAdmin. With your MS SQL, you may find that your clients have NT authentication on, so it'll actually, if you can get passwords for your domain, you might be able to use them against your databases as well. So some password reuse, so you might be able to get into your databases that way. Or, worse yet, they may have SA, the privileged account in MS SQL with no password. In this case, it's root and no password, but it's just not able to be accessed anywhere but localhost on this default install with XAMPP. It really just depends. You may find lots of different stuff, but databases are often a good place to look for interesting information. I didn't have you create a database in this case. I didn't want to make it too hard to set up, but whenever you get access to a database, certainly take a look at what's in there. Databases are often a good place to store sensitive data, though you can also use it like we did here, use it to get a foothold on the system. So let's take a look, and again, this is going to be in the default main directory. It says, warning, system cannot execute a blank command, so we forgot to give it that command parameter. So command equals net user administrator Georgia guest help assistant secret support. What if we did like net user James, password is Georgia, and add, just added a user to the system. We have system privileges right now, so we can do that. Databases almost always run as privileged users, so being able to get command execution through them is an ideal way to get on the system. So we are stuck with our kind of limited command shell here, but now that we have our command shell, we may be able to upgrade it. So we are, during post-exploitation, going to take a look at different methods of transferring files. So this is certainly not the only way to do this, but we're going to look at trivial FTP. So on XP, we do have a trivial FTP client by default. We also have FTP, so we can do basically script mode in FTP. Since we don't have an interactive command shell yet, we can't do like FTP to ask for the username. We give it the username, it asks for the password, we give it the password, we tell it the file we want. We can't do that from what we have here. But we do have a script mode in FTP where you can have it read from the script. So that would work as well. On some of your newer versions of Windows, you won't have trivial FTP by default, but you will have PowerShell. So we'll look at PowerShell a little bit in our post-exploitation time as well. Kind of have its own little section. Just a small amount of PowerShell. There's a few other options, like you can do it with Visual Basic. PowerShell particularly, I like it for bypassing antivirus. But we'll look at other methods. But let's just do our trivial FTP for now. There's my old session. So what I want to do is start up ATFTPD. I want to start it in daemon mode, so it's just going to listen and set bind-address to my Kali IP, and I'll just tell it I want to serve from the temp directory. So if I do a netstat.intp, let me make sure that 69 actually opened. Actually, it looks like it didn't. That's not good. Yes, AUX, ATFTPD. Oops. It needs to be grep. Make one mistake and I start making more. Okay, it says it is listing it. Not sure why I didn't. Oh, these are TCP ports. So you make one mistake, you just start making more. So nets.antp is going to look for TCP ports. And what is trivial FTP listed on? Well, 69 UDP, so no wonder it wasn't in my list. Alright, so, well, my PSAUX will tell us that it is indeed running. So let me copy meterpreter.php that we made in the last video to temp. And then from our web browser, we gotta get the syntax right here, which of course you can look it up. But what we want to do is TFTP. And then we need the IP address we want to grab it from, which is our Kali IP. We want git, that is our TFTP command. And I sometimes get the order wrong here, so it is in the slides. Feel free to look it up. You don't have to feel bad about looking things up. Nobody remembers everything. So I want to get the file meterpreter.php, and I want to put it again somewhere that I can access it. So I, again, am system, so I have the rights to write wherever I like. So we do want those double backslashes again to escape the backslash. We don't just end up with a file with a long name on the C drive. Transfer successful. Awesome. So now we should be able to go to meterpreter.php. Remember, I turned that exit on session to false on my listener in Metasploit. So without doing anything, since I'm using the same payload, there should still be a listener running in Metasploit. So I should just be able to go to it. What did I do wrong? Shell.php. Let's see. So TFTP get docs. Oh, I misspelled meterpreter. That helps. Meterpreter.php. So now it's doing that connecting again, so it looks like nothing's there. And this is something we'd probably report on too. Just, a small issue. I'm showing you, the major ones that give you a win, but we also would report on things like this, a low to medium issue here. It's like, oh, it just kind of tells you everything here, and they're out of date. So I'd want those banners to not give away quite so much. And certainly we'd want to tell them to update things. So if I come back to my meterpreter, I get meterpreter session 2. I'm actually still in meterpreter session 1, so I can background it. Do sessions-i2, and that drops me in. So I'm still system. So this just gives me a more interactive shell. My one here is not quite as fancy, but I do have another meterpreter shell. So another option here, we can use databases to get command execution in addition to being able to read the data that's in them, what kind of database it is, and what version is going to make a difference. Older versions make it easier to get command execution. There are some Metasploit modules for it. So if we had, I think, search MS SQL payload. Here's if we can get correct username and password, which it may be default or something guessable, or it may be you have NT access, so you can use passwords you've cracked, which we'll do in the next section. You can actually log in and have it try and run a Metasploit payload. Just right through Metasploit. So you have different options with databases depending on what you're working with, but always see if you can get into it. See if, in this case, just because you can't get into it directly, if maybe there's another way. Be aware of your administration backends that sometimes come with packages like this. Like XAMPP has a PHP MyAdmin. It may have an open interface by default that no one bothered to change or really even knew anything about it. So, just another way you may be able to get in.